we're looking at a t-test, and we're going to be looking at the assumptions on how to use a t-test in the SPSS system. So first, let's define what a t-test actually is. A t-test is a statistical analysis technique used to compare two group means on a continuous independent variable. In order to use a t-test, there are some assumptions that must be made, and there are some checklists that you have to qualify your data in order to use the t-test. Otherwise, you will end up using a different test on your data. So the first assumption is that one dependent variable must be measured at the continuous level. So for instance, your values have to be continuous on the dependent variable line, so it would be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So those values just continue. Assumption number 2, one independent variable that consists of two categorical groups. So like group 1 of, say, a group of teachers versus group 2. We'll be looking at two regions tonight in the data that we have. Assumption number 3, you have to have independence of observations. That means there's no relationship between the observations in each group of the independent variable or between the groups themselves. So with the data that we'll be looking at, we're going to assume that these 3 criteria have been met. However, there are 3 other pieces that we're going to look at, and we've got to determine if we can indeed use a t-test on the data. So here are the other 3 pieces. Assumption number 4, it says there should be no significant outliers in the 2 groups of your independent variable in terms of the dependent variable. Also, your n value for each group should equal to or be greater than 30. Assumption number 5, your dependent variable should be approximately normally distributed for each group of the independent variable. And then assumption number 6 is that you have homogeneity of variances. That means that the variance is equal in each group of your independent variable. So these 3 assumptions we will be checking to determine if a t-test is indeed the best test to use for our data. Let's look at the data real quickly. So the 2 things that we'll be looking at are enrollment, district enrollment, and we're going to be looking at and comparing region number 1 versus region number 5. So before I show you how to use a t-test, let's see if our data actually fits and would be best, if a t-test would be best to use to analyze that data. So we're going to go to Analyze, and then we're going to look at Descriptive Statistics under Analyze. And we'll look at Explore. Okay, so we've clicked those 3 items. I'm going to reset this so that you can see the entire process as we go through it. So first I'm going to click on Enroll. It's going to go in our dependent list, and then in our independent list, or in our factor list, we're going to put our region, and it will go there. Okay, we're going to look at plots because we want to determine if we have a normally distributed plot. So when you first come in here, it usually has, we need to click on None actually in box plots, and instead of a stem and leaf, we want a histogram, and we want to check the normality of plots with test. So we'll hit Continue, and then we're going to hit OK, and we're going to see if our data is going to fall in it's going to have normality within it. So give it a second for it to process through here, and so it can actually come up with some information. We're going to try this. Oh, there we go. Okay, there we go. So now all of our data has popped up. And so let's scroll down and let's look at test of normality. Now, one of the things that you can also see is you can see your n value here, your degrees of freedom. Notice with region 1, we have 72 as our n value, but in region 5, we only have 23. So our assumption number 4 is not met. So that's one big huge indicator that a t-test is not going to be the best test for this data. Also, as you look at the Shapiro-Wilk test and you look at the significance here, notice that we are going to determine that this has to actually be greater than 0.05. And so for region 1, that is not greater than 0.05. 0.05, it's actually 0.000. So that is another ding, ding, ding. It's not going to, we don't need to use a t-test here. Now with region 5, it is actually greater than 0.05, but region 1 is not. You can also look at your histogram. So for region 1, notice that is not a normally distributed curve. But if you go down and look at region 5, you can see that that does actually fit. If I can scroll down there, a little bit better into a normal distribution. It's kind of playing with me tonight here just a little bit. So let's try this again. There we go. And so you kind of saw that histogram 5. I'm getting a little scroll in there happening with my computer, but let's try it again. Okay, region 5 is a little bit more normally distributed. So I'm going to X out of this so we can look at something else real quickly. So we've seen that two of the assumptions are not met. I want to go ahead and check for homogeneity of variance. So let's go back to analyze, and we're going to click on compare means. And when we do that, we're going to go to the one-way ANOVA. Okay, I've already got enrollment in our dependent list, and I've got region in our factor list. We're going to click over on options real quickly and notice that homogeneity of variance test is also clicked, and then we want to hit continue and OK. Give that just a moment for that information to pop up, and notice that it did. And we're looking at based on mean because again we're comparing two means here. Now if this is greater than 0.05, then it is going to be, well, we'd have homogeneity of variance. But notice our significance here is not greater than 0.05, so that means that the variances are not homogeneous. Therefore, those assumptions, those 4, 5, and 6 assumptions, none of those were met for the t-test. So a t-test would not be the best thing to use for this data. I will show you how to use a t-test, or how to actually find a t-test and use it here, though, if it were. So if we go back to analyze and we go to compare means, you can see where it says independent samples t-test. And if we click on that, we already have enrollment as our test variable. We've got region 1 and 5. I'm going to reset that real quickly so we can again see how to do that. So you'll put enrollment here, and then region, we want that as our grouping variable. See the question marks? We have to define our groups. So we want region 1 and we want region 5 as our second group. We hit continue. Okay. And now once that data comes in, then we can again see our n values. We have an n value in region 1, which does meet the criteria, but region 5 does not at 23. You look at the Levine's test for equality of variances. That's another way that you can see if your variances are met. And if you look at the significance for that, notice that it's 0.011. In order for that to pass the equality of variances or the homogeneity of variances, that value actually has to be greater than 0.05, and it's not. So you can see that that doesn't pass the test or the assumption test for a t-test. We can look over at the t-test significance and notice that that value is actually greater than 0.05. Therefore, that tells us that it is not significant. It's greater than 0.05, so it is not significant according to our t-test. But since none of the assumptions were met for the t-test, we're going to need to run a different test with our data that we have. So we're going to go back to our main screen, and we're going to go back to analyze. So if we'll click on analyze, we're going to look at non-parametric test. And here we're going to go to legacy dialogues. We're going to go to 2 independent samples. So you can see the pathway to get there. So we click on 2 independent samples, and again I'm going to reset this so you can see what we have to do. We've got to put enrollment as our test variable list. Our grouping variable will be region, and we have the question mark. So let's define our groups as region 1 versus region 5. Hit continue, and then we're going to hit, we see that we're going to be using the Mann-Whitney U test for this. We've got that clicked, and then we'll hit OK. Now, on the Mann-Whitney U-test, we go down and we look at the significance. Here we have significance two-tailed, and we have 0.229. Notice that is actually greater than 0.05. So what we're looking for here is to determine significance between the two means, that value would have to be less than 0.05. So with both the t-test, even though the t-test did not meet the assumptions, and the Mann-Whitney U-test, we see that there is no significance between the two means of region 1 and region 5.